lo and behold, we go and we start doing these Ayurveda pieces. And I remember getting up early one morning, going into the bathroom to brush my teeth. And when I looked in the mirror, the whites of my eyes were so white. They were so white. They weren't pink. They weren't bluish. They weren't bloodshot. They were white. And white to the point where even I was like, oh, what? And then I was like, how are my eyes so white? And then I was like, hello and welcome to the How to Take Care of Yourself podcast. It's your friend Veronica, and I am extremely glad you're here. This is a good episode to start with, or it's a good episode if you're feeling down. It's a good episode if you need some inspiration. It's just a good all-around episode, and I may be biased because today's episode is with none other than Dr. Mona Warner. She's an Ayurvedic doctor, Ayurvedic yoga therapist. She's a yoga teacher training for many, many folks in the Kingston, Ontario area. And she's also my best friend. Today's episode, we dive into what makes Mona tick. We talk about all the different self-care routines that she uses. We talk a bit about the 3 pillars of Ayurveda, and we get into all sorts of things that you're going to want to hear. I am excited you're here. You're excited you're here. And I know Mona was excited to be here. So listen up, and I look forward to hearing what you think in the comments. Hey, before you get into it though, do me a favor and hit subscribe. No matter what platform you're listening to, or on all the platforms you listen to, it really helps me to tell the platforms, to tell the algorithms that this content is worth producing. And the more people who subscribe, the bigger the podcast can get. And the bigger the podcast can get means the better the podcast can get. And that's my mission, is to bring you the absolute best people, best information, and best tips so that you can live a long, healthy life and learn the most important ways to take care of yourself. Let's get into it. Hello, Mona Warner. How are you? I am well. How are you, Veronica?
I am great. I have been looking forward to this particular episode for since before I started the podcast, like way before. This has been one of the ones that I've been like, this is my favorite person on the planet other than my husband. And so I cannot wait to do this podcast. So I know you so well, but I don't know how much my audience does. And so I think we need to take it from the beginning. What is your origin story? How did you get to where you are now?
It's a good question. This year I turned 50, so there's like 50 years of backlog. However, I will try not to take 50 years to tell the story. I know, it's hard, right? I'd say my origin story in Ayurveda is probably pretty common, where my first exposure to Ayurveda was in yoga teacher training. So in 2003, I took my first yoga teacher training with a gentleman who at the time was known as Vishva, is now Yogiraj Vishvektu. So he has also, over the past many years, grown and evolved in his own practices. And Vishwa is a really beautiful and wonderful, inspiring and fascinating yoga teacher for someone like myself. So I'm Canadian. I'm in Ontario, Canada. I grew up in Ontario, Canada, and I had a pretty typical Ontario, Canada upbringing. I guess one of my nuances might be that I'm half French Canadian. So half of my lineage comes from the Quebec side of things and the other half from the West Coast. And so I, at the time, was living in Ottawa, Ontario, and I got accepted finally into this yoga teacher training. I had applied to take many yoga teacher trainings, and people kept saying no. And the reason was because I had learned yoga from Yogi Alan Finger, created this series of Yoga Zone VHS cassettes.
so old, VHS cassettes. And that was how I was introduced to yoga. And at the time when I really got into yoga, I was having a variety of health issues. And what I found was yoga was really helping. So I did a lot of yoga. However, I didn't have a lot of money because my health issues meant that I had to leave my work. I had to leave my job. It's really hard to afford a studio membership or anything like that when you are unemployed. I had this series of VHS videotapes and I did them very diligently, very dedicated as a human being if I decide it's worthy of dedication. And every day I did my Yogi Ellen Finger Yoga Zone videos. But then when I went to apply for yoga teacher training, they would say, "Who's your teacher?" And I'd say Alan Finger, but he's never met me and does not know who I am or that I exist. And so all these teacher trainings denied my application. They wouldn't accept me. And because they said, if you don't have a real teacher, then you can't possibly know yoga and you can't possibly be prepared to teach yoga. And I got accepted into this yoga teacher training with Vishva. And Vishva's had a very interesting history where he went away to an ashram. So he's Indian. And he went away to ashram when he was 8. And his dad was an Ayurvedic doctor. And so there's Vishva teaching us this yoga teacher training. And we did the thing you always do in teacher training. You have that afternoon where you learn about the allied sciences, although they don't call them that. They say, we're going to learn about yoga's sister science, Ayurveda. And so everyone's like, what? And then the quiz comes out and you check the boxes or you circle the things, whatever quiz it is you get. And then you go, oh, I guess I'm. And then you're like, and I have no idea what that is, right? And so Vishva, however, because his dad was an Ayurvedic doctor, he was very skillful with the pulse. So as people were writing their quizzes and very confusedly asking, like, what is Vata? What is Vata? What is Pitta? What is Kapha? Right? Like, it was amazing. And as I reflect on it, my heart, like, just, like the Grinch, my heart grew 3 sizes that day. Like, I have that kind of like just love and adoration for all of our innocent time. And so Vishwa comes over and he takes my pulse and his eyes get really big and he looks at me and he goes, oh, so much Vata. And I look at him back and I say, so is that a good thing? And he goes, oh, no. And then he said, okay. And then he went to the next person. So my introduction, my origin story of Ayurveda is one of so much Vata. Is that a good thing? No. And then this emoji, like, I don't know, right? What does that mean? So I was overwhelmed by that. I wanted to know more. I had a feeling it might be useful, but had zero idea what to do with it in order to make it practical or in order to apply it or in order to understand it at a fundamental level. So I kind of took that and I put it on the shelf. And then I sort of went on with my life because what else do you do, right? You go on with your life. And then a few years later in 2008, a friend of mine who owned a salon was having an Ayurvedic doctor come in and teach about the Marma points in a spa setting. I know, Marma therapy in a spa setting for this group. And when I found out about it, I said, hey, can I come? And she said, oh yeah, you do yoga stuff. This Ayurveda stuff should make sense to you. And I was like, I hope so, because that would be great. So I went and I had that experience. And again, found it really challenging to apply. Any of the questions I had were answered with, you don't need to know that. And so I was like, I feel like there's something here. It was like I could feel the juiciness of it. And it was like just out of reach. It's like your cat when they do the math to sit just so you can't pet them, but you're close enough that you think you could pet them. It's like that, right? So I have like this Ayurveda cat that's like coming close, but not close enough for me to actually be able to like do something with it and pet it. And then I ended up at Kripalu because I did. And so I ended up at Kripalu, and they were offering this module that was this variety of all these different things. The module included therapeutic yoga, prenatal yoga, yoga for round bodies, all these different things. And the way they chose to kind of interweave those together was to create a container using Ayurveda. And so Sudha, Carolyn Lundeen, was the main teacher for that module. And there we actually learned some things like daily routine and oil your body. And at the time, I was still working with the health issues that had caused me to leave my work. And so for anyone who doesn't know that part of my origin story, when I was 23, I started to have grand mal seizures. It was very distracting, disturbing, scary. Do I have a brain tumor? Am I going to die? All the things. And 23, not necessarily emotionally developed or stable enough to navigate that with skill. And I actually don't know that anybody navigates that kind of news in a way that isn't super intense, overwhelming, and has you question everything. And so I had been working with yoga because as I did yoga, I found my seizures, the frequency of my seizures reduced. And so that was really helpful. But then I kind of hit this place where I was like, I've healed a certain amount and I'm not like, I know there's more and I couldn't seem to get there with the yoga that I had or the yoga that I knew. And so lo and behold, we go and we start doing these Ayurveda pieces. And I remember getting up early one morning, going into the bathroom to brush my teeth. And when I looked in the mirror, the whites of my eyes were so white. They were so white. They weren't pink. They weren't bluish. They weren't bloodshot. They were white. And white to the point where even I was like, oh, what? And then I was like, how are my eyes so white? And then I was like, Ayurveda. And I was like, you're it. You're my ticket to the next thing. And so after that week with Sudha, I started to read about Ayurveda. I got my first Ayurveda book, the burgundy covered little Ayurveda book that Dr. Ladd/Dr. Robert Svoboda wrote. And, you're reading about your tongue and you're reading about tissues. And again, very more than my brain at the time could digest or handle, but I had a toe in the pond. And then from there, it was just sort of didn't end. So I took my Foundations of Ayurveda program through the Kripalu School of Ayurveda. And then a few years later, my Ayurvedic health counselor training, and that's where we met. And then we did our Ayurvedic practitioner training with Dr. Anusha. And then I did my Ayurveda doctor training with Dr. Anusha and graduated from that. It's been a year and a half. It'll be 2 years this year that program is concluded. And in all that, undertook a clinical practice and teach Ayurveda. And so what I found was when finally the door to Ayurveda actually opened in a way that I could step through it, first I found a great map for how to navigate my health and well-being, which is why I was there. I was unwell and I knew the potential for wellness existed for everybody. And I wanted that for myself because I felt like there were a lot of people I could help. But if I felt like dirt all the time, then it was really hard for me to focus on that. It was hard for me to be a good wife to my husband and hard for me to be a good daughter to my parents and hard for me to be a good friend to my friends. And so I wanted to figure out how far can I go with this? How much health can I cultivate? And so first I was blessed to discover some really great maps. Ayurveda has amazing maps of the terrain of health and well-being, and I think that will always be one of its strengths. I fell in love with the logic of it. I'm a utilitarian, and if something is useful, I'm all in, and if it's not, it goes on the shelf for me, and I just found useful thing after useful thing after useful thing, which is why when I learned that the word samhita, which is the Sanskrit word used to describe most of the Ayurvedic classical texts, means compilation of useful information,
I was like, Ayurveda, and there you go again, stealing my heart, right? Like, so I've just kept going and diving deeper and deeper, both from a study perspective, but also from a practical, applied, lived perspective, and probably will do so till I die.
Yeah. I can see that. I can totally see that. In all of your studies and all of this exploration, does anything, and I don't know if it's one or two things, does anything stand out as being the most profound thing for you in your Ayurvedic journey?
I'd say for me, it would be realizing and experiencing the power of simplicity. How sometimes the smallest, simplest practice can give you results beyond your wildest dreams, as long as you're consistent and dedicated and you do the thing. That's the thing with Ayurveda. If you don't do the thing, it will not work for you, because like yoga, you have to engage with it. You can't just think about it and look at it. You have to actually like do a thing. And if you do a thing, you'll get a result. And if it's the result you want, then keep doing the thing. And so there have been some practices, I've engaged in some practices that are ludicrously complicated, and my results were junk. Like, results were junk from those complicated practices. And so it constantly blows my mind that some of the simplest practices in Ayurveda, in my experience, have been the most potent. And so it reminds me that simplicity is very powerful, and not to underestimate the power of simple practices. Now, simple doesn't necessarily mean easy. To do something over and over and over and over again for an extended period of time in order to really create a different level of stability in your system, that's not easy. However, the practice you use to do that also doesn't have to be complicated, nor does it have to be rocket science. Ayurveda is actually very not rocket science. It's very commonsensical, based in logic, really commonsensical. And if you're able to find the right thing for you and then just do that every day, it's amazing how much health and well-being you can cultivate. So I'd say probably this aspect of simplicity. I think my mind likes to think things are more complicated than they are sometimes. I'm probably not alone in that. I doubt it. But yeah, the power of simple practice.
I like what you said about how your mind likes to overcomplicate it. I think that's one of the obstacles, right? Because, fortunately in some ways, but unfortunately in others, we're wired to figure out the problems because we're problem solvers. And that's been our, how we've survived. You live in the woods and you have to figure out the problems so that you can continue to live. Unfortunately now, or for however you want to look at it, we live in a world where those problems are, what most people's biggest problems are figuring out what they're going to eat, not how they're going to get it. For the most part, we're like, what do you want to eat? Right? That's the question every day we all ask, like, what do you want to eat? I don't know. Da, 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 da. But because our brains are wired that way, when we are faced with something like, I'm chronically dehydrated, if I drink water, it will solve that problem. And then the brain's like, well, I don't want to. Well, why don't you want it? It doesn't taste good. Well, that's not true. It doesn't taste like any. Well, that's exactly right. We get into this like argument with ourselves about whatever the simple thing is. And then we don't do it, or we kind of struggle with it. How have you overcome that?
I'm a work in progress. I'll just say that. I'm a work in progress, constant work in progress. In class this morning, Joseph, Veronica, and my Thursday morning yoga teacher, does a reading before class starts. And today he was talking about one of the yoga kleshas. And so the kleshas is a Sanskrit word, and it translates to the mental emotional afflictions. And so the kleshas are sort of the ways in which we create our own suffering as human beings. And a lot of this starts with the mind and perception. And it reminded me, and I actually emailed him about this morning, that at the beginning of the Ashtanga Hridaya, one of our Ayurvedic classical texts, the first two words are ragadi roga. And so raga refers to attachment, and adi means etc. So they're basically saying, think about those kleshas, think about those avenues of suffering we create for ourselves, forgetting the truth of who we are, leaning a little far into our personality, our likes and our dislikes, which creates the next two, which are excessive craving, so strong desire for something, even if it's not good for us. And then it's opposite, the opposite side of the coin, dvesha, or excessive repulsion. I won't go anywhere near that. I'm not interested in that. Keep that as far away from me as possible. I refuse. And then all of it together creates this sort of symphony of chaos that leads us into the fifth one, abhinivesha, which is a fear of loss of control, fear of loss of life, fear of loss of respect, fear of loss of our accolades and our successes, fear of all the things. And it had me think about this whole raga diroga, how these games that the mind plays are what can and almost always do lead to roga, which is the Sanskrit word for disease or illness or not feeling well. And so as we were in class today, I was thinking a lot about that, about this idea of where our mind roots strongly in some sort of opinion, and how sometimes that can really take away from our possibilities of moving towards health. And I think we all do it. We all do something that we know is not good for us, but we do it anyways. We all do something where we don't do a thing that we know is good for us. So it might be, I should eat more vegetables. Give me a muffin, right? Like, I should eat more vegetables, but I'm not doing it. I'm eating the muffin instead for whatever reason. And I'm not judging muffins. I love muffins, right? Like I love to bake. I love muffins. And on the other end of things, it might be, so I know this is good for me, I'm not doing it. But it might also be, I know this is not great for me, and I'm doing it anyways. And mine is chocolate. I love chocolate. I eat chocolate every day. I don't need to eat chocolate every day. And that's the one I'm working on this year. It's only taken me, 20 years to work on this. And so it's the one I'm working on, where it's like, do I actually have a taste for the chocolate? Do I feel like the chocolate's going to or am I just shoving chocolate in my mouth because I've decided I like chocolate? And so it's there and I'm going to eat it. So the mind is always really interesting and definitely a factor in our health and well-being, as is our personality, which is our collection of the pile of things we like, the pile of things we don't like. And so we tend to try to lean into all the things we like and only do that. And we lean away from all the things we don't like, forgetting that we as an organism change every single day. And if we were open to it, maybe something we don't like, we might like, and maybe something we do like, we would be ready to let go of. So what we hang on to and what we let go of is a dynamic process, but the personality likes to try to make it very firm and structured, and it's like this and it's always like this. There's nothing that's always like this. That's why that expression, this too shall pass, exists. But anyhow, that was very long. Sorry.
No need to apologize. I think that was a fabulous explanation. And it got me thinking. I was listening to a podcast this morning where the gentleman, and I can't remember his name right now, but ironically, because he was talking about brain health, but he was talking about how automatic negative thoughts, or as he called them, ants, right? Because it's a nice way to think about the ants crawling in. He said they are absolutely detrimental to our health, these automatic negative thoughts. And I always am curious how these kind of things end up driving our habits, in either direction. But I think that automatic negative thoughts tend to drive our behaviors into maybe not so health promoting ways. And what you were just describing is that pile of likes, that pile of dislikes. We can get really attached to those thoughts that drive us there, to that, like, inflexibility of choice almost. It's like, oh no, but I always do this. That's what I do, right? That's who I am. We always say that, right? That's just who I am. I hear that from people when I'm like, oh yeah, maybe think about not doing that thing that's making you sick. Well, I don't know. That's who I am, right? I hear that. It comes up a lot with people, especially right now, about watching the news. It's like, I just saw a study where they said people who watch the news in the morning are 27% less happy in the afternoon. And I'm like, oh, have you ever thought about not watching the news, to my people who are depressed and sad? And they're like, oh, but that's just who I am. And I'm like, oh, but what if you didn't, though?
It's so fascinating to think about. And I don't know if it's because I'm a Gemini and so I just have a little bit more personality malleability. However, there are definitely some things that I might be more firm around. And I try to remember that where I can be more open to ideas, even if initially I might not love the thought, I try to be open to a wide variety of ideas, because you never know when you're going to find that piece or that thing that might be the thing that takes your health or your well-being or whatever your individual personal goals are to that like next step. And so I've found my whole life to be really surprising. I think about this a lot. If at my high school graduation, someone had said to me, 20 years from now, you will be a yoga teacher. You will be a yoga teacher trainer. You will study an Indian medical science called Ayurveda, and you will help people by means of natural health and well-being. And even a little further from there, you'll study Vedic astrology. I would have fallen on the floor laughing my ass off. I kid you not. That all those ideas would have seemed ridiculous to my 18-year-old mind. And yet this year I turned 50 and here I am, yoga teacher trainer, Ayurvedic doctor, Ayurvedic yoga therapist, and baby Vedic astrologer. And it's like, look at that. That did not go as I planned. And I can't see myself being anywhere else. Where else would I be? Who else would I be? What else would I do? I can't even imagine it. So I think when it comes to the mind and the ideas and this idea of like what's a yes and what's a no, where we can, and there will be some things we might be very, very firm on. You know, I'm very firm on trying my best to be the most compassionate human that I can in a world that from what I see and what I experience, lacks compassion. So I would kind of want to fill it with that. And so I'm a little more firm on that. I've chosen that as a belief and I want to go with that. And there are other things where I'm like, well, maybe consider this, even for a moment. And yes, and maybe it's super uncomfortable to do that, but maybe consider this, that our likes and dislikes can actually be a little bit softer, so that we can change our minds about what we hang on to and what we let go of, because really that's life and aging. As you live and learn, the idea is as you learn more, choose within the bigger frame as opposed to the little amount you knew when you were little. Now that you're a more mature organism, the idea is you might have more choices, but you only have them if you entertain them.
Right. Do the best you can until you know better, then do better.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really smart thing to remember as it pertains to taking care of the self. We have to be open to anything, because we never know, much like your 18-year-old self, and your 23-year-old self, you never know what's going to be the thing that's going to move the needle in a positive direction. And it's easy to slap the blinders on whatever it is. If it's fear, it's usually fear, right? We're afraid of possibility because it can seem overwhelming. Or what if it doesn't go well? Well, if it doesn't go well, then you change your trajectory again. Like you just correct,
I feel like this is the second thing that I love about Ayurveda is in the classics, they talk about Hita and Ahita. And so hita is a Sanskrit word that means useful, and ahita is a Sanskrit word that means not useful. And then the next line tells you how you identify those, sukham, dukkha. So sukham refers to a sense of ease, a sense of well-being, a sense of sweetness, a positive embodied space, whereas dukkha tends to translate to suffering, or a space where we don't feel good. And from an Ayurvedic perspective, there's nothing that's all good and nothing that's all bad. The question is, for this person in their context, is this useful right now? And so this means, by its very nature, Ayurveda holds things far more gently, because it's not that there's a thing that's all good and a thing that's all bad. Everything has its time and place where it can act as a catalyst or a vehicle for well-being. It can be medicine. And those very same things can go in the opposite direction in a different context or in a different stage of life where things have changed, and now the thing that was the thing is no longer the thing. And so this concept of utility and non-utility, I think, is more useful. Speaking of utility, speaking of that, right? Like, it's more useful to look at an idea as opposed to I like this, I don't like this, which is very personality based. And again, it induces a certain amount of rigidity. Whereas if we look at it with like, okay, I see this thing, would this be useful for me to try right now? Or is this not useful for me at this stage? Because if we were the same for our whole life, that would be one thing. But nothing could be further from the truth. We change every moment of every day with every in-breath and every out-breath. So if we don't hold things more loosely, we're going to miss when something changes enough that we need to change our own response to things. And it might be from being a baby to being a toddler, or a toddler to a tween, or a tween to a teen, or a teen to a young adult, or a young adult to a middle-aged adult, or a middle-aged adult going through menopause or andropause, moving towards older, each of these places, each of these timestamps, so to speak, there's a need for things to shift. However, if we're holding too tight onto anything, we're first going to miss the fact that we're changing and how we're changing, and then we're going to miss what that means. How do we respond to that in terms of our nutrition, our sleep, our activities, the company we keep, et cetera, whatever. But useful, not useful, I think is a more open paradigm, a more open viewpoint for things.
I think that's a really smart delineation, because we have a tendency as humans to frame things as good or bad, and putting emotional weight behind things makes it really hard to make an unbiased judgment call on what is useful or not useful. And it's so personal, as people might know. There's no one size fits all in life. There just isn't. Other than we all had to be born and we're all going to die. Other than that, there's just an infinite myriad of ways that things can affect us or not affect us. And so being on that personal journey of useful versus not useful, and being open to exploring how it might shift in the different context of seasonality or time of day or time of life, as you were saying, we have to be those mad scientists in the laboratory of the body in order to really be in tune with what's there and what's needed. And so it asks us to cultivate that beginner's mind every single moment of every single day. Like, I don't know. You got to be able to say, I don't know. And I think that's hard for people. People don't want to live in that state of I don't know.
So a couple of evenings ago, I had a guest teacher in for one of the programs that I teach, our friend Sarah, the amazing Sarah Knight. And I had invited Sarah in to talk about ritual. And one of the things she said was so beautiful, which is that there's this ritual of being born. There's this ritual of death, and in between is the ceremony of life. Because ceremony takes place in the spaces in between, and how the spaces in between, those liminal spaces, are filled with mystery and possibility and potential. But inherent in that is not always knowing what that means or where it's going to go or what it's going to look like or how it's going to feel. And how being in those spaces in between, being in that unknown, as important as it is also hard when, because our nature is to be constantly changing and evolving, we crave stability like so badly, crave it so intensely. And so we find all these ways to create versions of stability. Sometimes we hold it way too tight and it becomes rigidity. So rigidity is like a false stability where we think we've put a floor in, but really, the floor's on water. And so it's like, blah, blah, blah. But it's because it can be really challenging to be in that mystery of possibility. And I think culturally, at least I'm reflecting on the culture I predominantly am in, they don't value not knowing. They value know-it-all. So if you know it all, yay you, let's put your face up on the wall at the corporate headquarters, whatever. But if you're the person who's like, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? People are like, no, now I'm uncomfortable. You need to go sit in an office somewhere else. So there's like a cultural component where it can put a lot of pressure on us. And again, the gift of Ayurveda, creating this openness and this, I think, frankly, reality check. You don't know everything. You will never know everything. And a sign that you actually know something is being able to say, I know these things and I'm aware there's so much more that I don't know. I've done all this study to realize how much I don't know. I left Ayurveda Doctor School. I had done 15 years straight of studying my assets off. And what was my conclusion? Ayurveda is amazing. Ayurveda is huge. And as much as I might know, there's so much more that I don't know. Because it's different for every person, in every situation, in every context. And then it's like, okay, so I don't know everything. Let's take a step forward anyways, let's explore this anyway.
Exactly. We have to be open to the possibilities. And when you're talking about not knowing everything, I think the only way to know everything is as if you knew the complete history and experience of every single person on the planet since the beginning of humanity. Right? That would be the only way to know it all. And that's impossible.
Yeah, not going to happen.
No, it's totally not going to happen. I don't want it to happen. The idea of it's overwhelming. Like, I have a hard enough time just knowing my loved ones and my clients, right? And even then, I'm like, I still don't know. My husband, been married for 10 years, surprises me still almost every single day. He says or does something that I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was the thing you thought or that you believed or that you knew. That's the one that usually gets me like, oh, I didn't know you knew that. Like, oh, or that you think about that. That's fascinating.
It was like 2 weeks ago, I can't remember what we were doing, but we had decided we were going to have a cup of tea. And I said to Glenn, do you know what kind of tea you want? Glenn is my amazing husband. And he said, I think I'm going to go with licorice tea because that one's cooling. And my eyes opened really big and I said, pardon? And he said, because licorice tea is cooling. And I looked at him and I'm like, how do you know that? He goes, oh, I'm just making it up, but it sounds like something you would say.
But he was right.
It is cooling. And I was like, oh, and this is the osmosis of the company you keep, right? And so in all these Indian traditions, they always talk about Sangha or this idea of enlightened company because you become like what you spend time with or what you engage in. So yeah, we've been together a long time. So Glenn now knows that licorice tea is cooling. Good on you, babe. Good on you.
And isn't it fascinating how that is one of the ways we and the people around us learn is through that osmosis. And when I think about Sangha, I think about those relationships where you feel very comfortable. So you kind of let your guards down a little bit. So things are more able to seep in because you are able in these relationships to sit with a little bit of I don't know, because there's love there, and that love softens that rigidity.
And it love creates its own floor. Love creates its own floor. And I think for humans, that fundamental need to belong, what we're really looking for is to feel loved. It creates a floor to our inner being. And that's why loss and grief can be, speaking of the kleshas, those afflictions, when we lose or think we've lost something that was helping to create a floor for us, having no floor is very, very destabilizing. It's very scary.
It really is. And that's one of the times where we have to really lean into the ways that we take care of ourselves. And we have to really lean into the simple little things that create stability and security for us. And so I'm curious, in your practice, what are those things that are the fundamental, non-negotiable things that create that health, that stability, that structure for your practices?
Yeah. Big question. So simple things, but not necessarily easy things, although some of them are straightforward. I need the right amount of sleep. And so going to bed on time and organizing things, because we were just talking about how what you do in the morning can impact your sleep at night, and what I did yesterday will impact my today, right? And so organizing things so that I can go to sleep and fall asleep and stay asleep and be rested is super important, especially with my seizure disorder. And so fatigue or exhaustion tends to definitely predispose me to having seizures. Although it was like a weekly thing, and now it's like maybe once every 10 years I'll get stressed enough that it comes forward. But I know it, that possibility is in there. So sleep ends up being really important. And I also have a daily meditation practice. So I have a mantra. It's 4 words, four short little words. I have a mantra that I work with, and I have for a few years now. And so I sit and I do my meditation practice. Sometimes I don't get to do it all at once. And so there's a certain number of repetitions that has been recommended for me. And sometimes I can't do them all in a row. So I might do 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 5 minutes there. It takes about 23, 24 minutes. So I try to do it all together. But if I can't, I've learned and chosen, it's both things. It's learning and then also choosing the thing you learned, because you can learn something and totally ignore it. So I have learned this thing, and I am doing my best to work with it, to not put so much pressure on myself for things to have to look a certain way. I think this idealizing and perfectionating, I don't know if that's a word, we're going to go with it. And perfectionating of practice is BS. I think that's the thing that actually makes us sick. And so I've decided to take that pressure off myself. And as long as I do my repetitions, even if it takes me all day to fit in 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and then 5 minutes right before bed, I do that because I do find it really helpful for my mind and for my heart, and to help me create a bit of space to just digest my life and to pause. So I have found space and pause to be really important. I need to move my body every day, whether it's walk the dog, do yoga class, go to the gym. And I have a certain routine around that. Although, again, I've become less rigid around it needing to be like that all the time. So if I'm fatigued and maybe I need to miss something in order to rest more, then I will. And when I'm well rested, then all those activities serve me really well. But when I'm tired, those activities deplete me. So even within the idea of self-care, we need to be sort of zooming. Ayurveda and yoga are so good. Zoom out, zoom in, right? Zoom out, zoom in. And so activity every day is really useful for me and important, but not if I'm tired or depleted. So the resting, and then the creating space for mental calming, so the meditation, The movement is really important for me. I have a whole routine that involves scraping my tongue and brushing my teeth and rinsing my eyes and oiling my skin. So I have that whole classic, the way you would picture an Ayurvedic daily routine piece. I have that, but I have two versions of it. I have the I have time for this version, and I have the I don't feel like I have time for this version. And so the tongue scraping, the toothbrushing, the eye rinsing, that's basically all the time. And if I have more time, then it includes the skin oiling, the sea salt water gargling. I do have a shower every day. I find that really good, not only to keep my body feeling good, but to also refreshen the mind. So I feel like it creates a nice little pause, and it helps me my showers are always at a point of transition where I'm going from one kind of activity to another. And so it's a nice way to shift gears, almost like a little, as Sarah would say, a ritual to going into doing the next thing. So I find that helpful. And then during the day, it's just a lot of during the day stuff. And there I try to eat well. That's my key thing. I try to have a nourishing breakfast, a nourishing lunch, a nourishing dinner. I don't always get the mark on those. Yesterday was a perfect example of missing the mark on two of those entirely. Things just took the day gets away from you sometimes. I hadn't done as good of planning as I could have. And so I ended up where I was like, desperate, starving, crap, However, I do try to put time and energy into that, knowing it won't happen on its own. And we were talking before we hit record about turmeric milk. So for me, my ginger turmeric milk has been for the past 6-8 months has been just an essential part of my nourishment and of supporting my physical body so that it can keep up with my mind. Because my mind is definitely engaged and active and has all sorts of ideas. And so how do I support my body so that it can at least try to keep up with my mind,
That's a solid daily routine. There's a lot in there. And I like what you said, that there's the version of the I have time to do it and the version of I don't have time to do it. Because let's be honest, life doesn't always work out where you have the full 45 minutes to an hour in the morning to do all the things. And so you have to kind of develop the shortcut version of I know I have to scrape my tongue, brush my teeth, take a shower, but maybe I leave out the oiling, or maybe I have the, gargling for another time or whatever it is. And I also love what you had to say about fitting in your mantra meditation in piecemeal during the day, if that's what needs to happen. So that whole idea of perfectionism, if we're waiting for everything to be perfect before we do the thing, we're never going to do the thing. Yeah. And then the other thing I would say around that is don't wait till you feel like it, because you might never feel like it. You just have to do the thing no matter how you feel. Other than if you're exhausted and you can't work out, that's one thing. But if you're waiting to feel like meditating, no, that needs to be do you always feel like brushing your teeth? No, but you got to do it. We all do it. We were trained to do it. So that tells me that you can train yourself like you have that, I don't feel like meditating. I'm going to do it anyway. And maybe you even train yourself. And this is something that comes out of my yoga studies is the things you don't want to do in that practice, you need to do them more, right? That's something that one of my teachers said. She's like, if you hate a pose, that means you need to do it. And so if I'm running up against a practice or a habit that I want to cultivate and that I know is going to be good for me, and I'm like, oh, I just don't want to, then I actually have been trying to turn my into, well, then just almost in defiance of that mood of being no, I'm going to do it anyway. Screw you, Veronica. I don't know why. But that's the attitude I've had to cultivate.
Well, and I find it so interesting because I may not feel like doing a thing on a certain day. However, if I do the thing, it changes how I feel. And so one of the things we forget about the Ayurvedic daily routine is it's via the body for the mind. The daily routine, yes, I'm oiling my skin and I'm scraping my tongue and I'm going to bed on time and I'm eating on time or trying to, whatever the things are, I'm doing all of these things via my body. However, the stability it creates in my body carries over to creating a stability in my mind as well. And so what I've realized is that my moods, my personality, that aspect that is definitely more fluctuating, sometimes we're hungry, sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're neutral, sometimes we're calm, sometimes we're agitated, sometimes we're like, all of that mental, emotional, like all those vrittis, right? All those fluctuations in the field of the heart mind, they're a natural part of being human. And if I honor the routine that I've learned over the past, 15, 20 years works for me, I have much less highs and lows in those fluctuations. And sometimes if I'm low and I do a thing like have my shower anyways, I feel better. And sometimes if I'm up here and I'm like, I'm overwhelmed. And then it's like, okay, so sit and meditate or sit and just breathe. Set a timer for 30 seconds. Breathe for 30 seconds. And if a practice is a really good fit for you, it will help you to regulate in a sense of always feeling whether you like calm, stable, satisfied, happy. I don't know. Everybody's emotional flavoring is very different and unique to them. I'm not somebody who seeks happiness. Like that's just not my thing. However, I love to feel satisfied. I love that sense of like, that feels complete. That feels like it was useful. I feel satisfied. Like that to me is my piece. I got people go for different things. However, a routine that's really suitable for us will help us connect to that emotional flavor that allows us to feel, again, more of that ease, right? More of that sukha in our lives.
I think it's really interesting what you just said about seeking satisfaction, because I've come to that conclusion in my own life. I'm like, I don't know if seeking happiness is what I need to be satisfied. And in that satisfied, there's contentment. And I forget where I read this, but I read somewhere like our lives are not supposed to be about the pursuit of happiness, because it's ridiculous to think that you'll be happy all the time.
Yeah,
but you can be content.
Yeah, it's impossible to be happy all the time because we live in a world where things are constantly dying. We live in the Mrityu Loka. We live in the realm where things are born, they exist, and they die. And with each death, with each loss, we will experience grief. I like to think of grief basically as your, all the tracks on your emotional iPod on shuffle for a prolonged period of time. So one moment you're relieved, one moment you're horribly sad, one moment you're ecstatically joyful, one moment you're filled with love, one moment you're raging and tanked. Like it's basically the emotional, tracks on your iPod just on shuffle for however long it takes for you to grieve. But because we live in this world where impermanence is the basis, there will always be times where we won't be happy. I'm not going to be happy when anyone I know. We just found out yesterday a friend of ours passed away. I'm not happy about that. She was amazing. She made the world a better place by being in it. Sucks that she's not here. Grief, right? So, however, I can be in grief and still find that place of inner calm stability, of satisfaction, of contentment, if those are the words we want to use. I can hold both of those more easily than I can hold grief and happiness. But that might just be me. I also don't want to infer that other people have to have the same emotional flavoring and experience that I have by any means.
No, and I think the more I study and the more I look at the psychology behind the way humans work, that is the commonality. And people, I think it's often a cause of mental instability, is people think they're supposed to be happy all the time, and they get it in their head that that's where you're supposed to be. That's the direction. And then when it's really hard to achieve, then they're horribly unsatisfied and they get really upset. And then that leads into these different mental, instabilities is the best word I have for it, where they feel like they're missing the mark. They feel like they're less than. And then that becomes a story that leads to more deep mental illnesses. And instead, if they shifted into, no, I just need to be satisfied. And it's much easier to fix dissatisfaction than it is to fix depression, in a way, if we were to take happiness and depression as two sides of the same coin. I think it's much easier to look at it like, okay, so I'm not satisfied with this. All right, well, what would make you satisfied with it? That's a less loaded question for most people, I think. Well, this doesn't make me happy. Oh, well, what would make you happy? I don't know, right? Because that's usually the answer. But what would make it feel more satisfying? Well, I'm cold. Okay, well, what would feel more satisfying? Well, to put a sweater on. Great. And then there are other people that are like, I'm not cold enough. Okay, so what would make it feel more satisfying? To go outside, right? Or whatever it is. But giving people a different spectrum of analysis to look at versus happy, sad, happy, depressed, satisfaction, dissatisfaction.
This idea of satisfaction and contentment, again, comes from the Ayurvedic classics. In the Sushruta Samhita, when they define health, right? The Ayurvedic definition of health talks about, first of all, a lot of balancing in the constitutional energies, balancing in the digestive potential, balancing in the building of the tissues, right through to proper elimination of the byproducts of metabolism so the body doesn't hold on to toxicity on all the levels. And then the next line, they talk about this word prasanna, which is often translated as contentment. And I heard somebody translate it as satisfaction. And I was like, there we go. And it's the satisfaction of the spirit. So recognizing the more holistic and greater nature of Ayurvedic well-being pursuit. It's not limited to your physicality. You know, it's not just your meat sack. You are so much more than just a machine. And so the satisfaction of the soul or the spirit, for those who believe in such things, of the sense organs, because these are factors that bridge between the world around you and your inner world and the mind. And so this idea of satisfaction and contentment are part of sensory health, mental health, spiritual health, which are also part of health and well-being. So yeah, again, Ayurveda is pretty darn brilliant.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. Speaking of health and well-being, if you were going to speak to someone who is beginning on their journey towards better health, towards better well-being, towards taking care of themselves, what would be some of the first kind of fundamental things you would tell that person, like habits and such?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it as we know in Ayurveda, everything depends, right? It depends. I'd say if somebody's looking for something really simple that they could add into their current routine, I love tongue scraping because it's very simple, low-hanging fruit. And if you don't have a tongue scraper, you can just use a spoon. Most people have utensils, right? So you could always use a spoon to scrape your tongue to just start the process of helping the body to eliminate the waste components that build up. And not because we're wasty, but it's just a natural part of the process of metabolism. In every biochemical process, you have inputs, you have outputs, and then you have stuff that it's like, and then there's this extra stuff. What do we do with the extra stuff? In Ayurveda, we try to move it out. So I think tongue scraping is a nice starting point. And again, I'm a big advocate of Ayurveda's 3 pillars, right? That's the map of Ayurveda that I feel is the most accessible for people who are new to Ayurveda. It's in the classics, so it's absolutely part of classical teachings. However, it hasn't classically been the route people take to learn about Ayurveda, and I find it really useful. So Ayurveda's 3 pillars talk about nourishment, talk about sleep, and talk about resource management. And so in terms of nutrition, actually nourishing yourselves, as our teacher, Dr. Anusha, would say, eat the food. The body in Sanskrit is known as the layer made of food. And without food, the body cannot be sustained or maintained. And so finding through whatever pathway, whatever map, whatever approach resonates with you, a way of eating that actually nourishes and sustains your being is really useful. And then just keep doing that. Pretty much you will do that every day until you die. And so that's good. So nourish oneself. And if we were to take the Ayurvedic approach to nourishment, we would also be looking at the digestive capacity, right? The Agni. And so in Ayurveda, we spend a lot of time around this concept of Agni. It's basically the sun of the solar system that is the Ayurveda, right? So it really is the middle piece, and a lot of other things revolve around that sun of digestive potential. However, it takes a little bit of extra time and energy to learn about that. So first and foremost, eat the food. Secondly, if you have the time and the inclination, or if eating the food is challenging for you, maybe like me, you have food sensitivities or allergies. Maybe like me, you've had digestive issues. Then you might have more time and energy or resource to learn about these digestive concepts, which I have found them to be immensely useful. They have completely changed my life. Thank you, Ayurveda. And so nutrition is one of the pillars. The second pillar is sleep. And I already alluded to how I will go the extra mile to make sure I am well rested. It serves not only my physicality, but it serves my mind as well. All you have to do, if you really want to check in with sleep, get less than 4 hours sleep one night and see how useful you are the next day. You're not. And it doesn't matter who you are. You're not. Or cross enough time zones all in one shot and then all of a sudden have to adhere to a new time zone, which will mean that you're not getting sleep at the same time as you usually do. And you'll notice how your mind and your body function totally differently. And so giving both the body, the heart, and the mind an opportunity to reset through restorative sleep, super, super important. Big advocate for that. And then when it comes to sleep, do what you need to do, whatever you need to do. If you need to go to bed at 8 o'clock, go to bed at 8 o'clock. If you need to, if you're someone who needs 9 hours of sleep, figure out how to get 9 hours of sleep, etc. Again, Ayurveda has a lot to say about that, but the basic nuts and bolts of it is everyone has to figure out what they need to figure out to sleep. And then the third one is resource management. Know your limits of energy and resource and play within those limits. Our souls may be infinite, and because we have a connection to our inner light of awareness, our soul, our spirit, there's a part of us that feels like we have this infinite vastness to us. It's never ending, it's eternal. And that is true. However, your physical body is finite and it only has so much energy and so many resources. And if we don't figure that out, we will suffer because we will run out of, it's like when your car runs out of gas. If you just put the pedal to the floor, that does not make the car that's run out of gas go any further along the road. It doesn't work. And so this is the idea of food in the tank, then press down on the pedal. But there's this whole thought in Ayurveda land about how there's a version of a daily routine of an amount of work and an amount of rest, an amount of activity and an amount of calm, the different, how you take care of your sense organs, when you eat, how you do the eating, all the things. And again, Ayurveda has books and books and books filled with these kinds of ideas. But it's finding a routine that actually works not just for your mind, but for your body as well. And so I feel like the 3 pillars are a great starting point for people because they can kind of zoom in on the one that makes sense. So if your sleep is crap, then you'll want to zoom in on figuring out sleep. And if your digestion is crap, then you'll want to zoom in on figuring out digestion. And if you're always exhausted because you're always saying yes to everything, even the things you don't want to do, and you haven't learned to say no yet, then you might need to zoom in on energy management and resource management to sort that out. And what's so cool about the 3 pillars is by working on one, you're working on all of them. Because when you sleep well, you digest better and you have more energy to go into your day. When you manage your routine well, your digestion improves and your sleep improves. And when you improve your digestion, you will sleep better and you will have more energy to live your life. And so it doesn't even matter which of the 3 pillars you pick something, pick a thing and just move in that direction. I think the biggest challenge for people is sometimes we're hoping for like an immediate, huge, grand, transformative result. And I would say Ayurveda can be, it isn't always. Sometimes the results are astoundingly quick. However, because it's meant to be a lifelong practice, we're more thinking of health as a marathon than a sprint. And so the idea is that we will dedicate to our self-care practice consistently over a lifetime. So some of the things that will change will definitely change. However, they won't change overnight. They will change over time. And those changes will build on themselves and it'll, your health will become more and more stable and gradually stronger and stronger and stronger. I'm healthier at almost 50 than I was in my teens, 20s, and 30s. And I'm not special. If I can do it, it can be done. Like, that's what's so crazy about it to me is if I can do it, it can be done. And so I don't know that there's like not the way. Figure out what you need and move in that direction and just keep doing that. Keep checking in. What do I need now? My sleep is better, but I feel like every time I eat something, I get farty. Okay, move in the direction of nourishment. How do we support the digestion? When that resolves, pick another thing. And so you don't have to do all the things. You have to do the things you need to do.
Well said. And for those of you that want to go deeper, so Mona is an author of a few books, not the least of which is one I recommend to absolutely everyone. I think it's a fundamental guide to being human. It's Ayurveda's 3 Pillars of Health. It's everywhere that you buy books. I think it's on Amazon Kindle for like $3.99 in the US, which is a hell of a deal. Although I highly recommend getting the paper version because you're going to want to take notes in it. You're going to want to bookmark sections. You're going to want to have the charts and different things at easy access. So I think, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes for sure. Your explanation was perfect, Mona, and I would thoroughly agree with you. Those are the fundamentals. That's why they're the 3 pillars, because the 3 pillars are like a stool that you sit on. So if one of those legs on the stool that you're sitting on is deficient in some way, you're gonna fall over. And so you have to, and it's an ongoing process. It's not that you build the legs of the stool perfectly and then they stay that way. It's constantly like, when you're at the restaurant and something's wobbly, you've got to get the matchbook and stick it under the leg. And maybe the matchbook is a good meal. And maybe the matchbook is a good night's sleep. And maybe the matchbook is saying no to the PTA meeting. But we're constantly finding ways to stabilize that stool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
So, Mona, you have some programming coming up soon. Would you like to tell our audience about that?
Sure thing. Each year, I am so excited to run a Foundations of Ayurveda program. And it's a 200-hour program that focuses on giving folks a really solid foundation in the Ayurvedic teachings. We start at the beginning where we talk about the philosophy of Ayurveda, origins of Ayurveda, and connections to some of the allied sciences. Then we go into 5-element theory and the qualities. Then we go into the 3 pillars of health, where we cover each of the 3 pillars of nourishment and sleep and daily routine, energy management in a lovely amount of detail. There's so much practical, applied information in the program. It's mind-blowing. We learn more about the doshas, because this is, again, a unique aspect of Ayurveda that folks are really interested in. And then we end with a module on Vedic psychology, so the Ayurvedic perspective on the mind. There's also an asynchronous module on Ayurvedic herbology, so folks can start to learn a little bit about what we call the science of substanceology in Ayurveda, learning about the different plants and how they impact us and how they can be used for healing. The one that's coming up is a 9-month program. The program consists of weekly webinars and then a couple of weekends, no more than one weekend a month, but time spent together so that we have 200 hours to dive into Ayurveda. Hopefully, the outcome is that folks will feel like they have a really good amount of tools they can use to support their own health and well-being. So we have a lot of fun. Veronica teaches in the program. Dr. Anusha joins us for a webinar or two. It's a lot of applicable learning. The program is designed that you leave with a lot of different ways that you can support your own health and well-being. This program is for anybody who wants to learn more about Ayurveda, anyone who wants to feel better and wants a method that is time-tested and actually has proven efficacy. I don't know if Ayurveda is trending or not, but we can definitely both speak to the fact that Ayurveda is useful and it works for a lot of people.
That's awesome. And so for folks that would like to learn more, the program starts March 19th, and there is a link in the description below. Just click that. It'll take you directly to the information page on the program. And if you feel like you're still wanting to ask more questions, feel free to reach out to Mona at monawarner.com. Thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for talking, Mona.
Thanks, Veronica.
Now we get to the, I think of it as the fun part, although this has all been fun for me. So I'm going to ask you some questions. You knew this was coming. And the first one, because I know of your love for Marvel movies, is if you could be a Marvel character, which Marvel character would you be?
Oh, it's such a good question. I'm not entirely certain. So I have the sarcasm of Tony Stark for sure, and not even Iron Man, just Tony Stark. So I don't know if that even counts. In my mind, I'd like to think I'm as much a ninja as the Black Widow, except that I'm not. But in my mind, I would love to think that of myself. I'm probably more like Ant-Man, actually. Zoom in, zoom out. Weird stuff happening all over the place. An ant the size of a dog, a fire truck the size of a toy. I'm probably more like Ant-Man for my capacity, thanks to my meditation teacher, Larry, to zoom in, to zoom out, and then to try to do good. So yeah, I'm probably more like Ant-Man.
Okay, I did not see that coming. That's hilarious. And it's so far my favorite thing that's happened today in my entire day. That was the best part. So, and then I've started a new tradition on the podcast. It starts with you, so you're welcome. So I have the Delve deck, which are a series of conversation cards. They're called conversation starters for every situation, from getting to know new friends to bonding with your closest confidants. And I'm not going to look, I'm just going to pick a card at random. And I'm going to ask you that question. And so we have no idea what it is. This is very exciting. Oh, I love
We're
this.
in the
This is
mystery.
hilarious.
We're in the mystery. That's what we've been talking about.
It is. It's being in the mystery. And so this is a great question for us because we're Gen X. What toys did you have as a kid that would be considered too dangerous to give to a child today?
Lawn darts.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Lawn dart. I can remember my brother and I just firing these things like they were axes, yeah, there was that. Ooh, I shot my dad with a BB gun once, but it was the accident. So my dad is ex-military. Both my parents are ex-military, and my brother had wanted to learn how to shoot a BB gun, and my dad had decided this was a good life skill for all of us. So in our basement, he had put this cardboard box, and we had all of our little Smurfs. I don't know if anybody else remembers Smurfs. Talk about Gen X. Had all of our little Smurfs in the cardboard box, and then we were supposed to stand back, and then you shoot, crank the BB gun and then shoot at the thing. So there were these rules. You cannot point the BB gun at each other, at anyone, or at the cat, or any animal, or anything that's alive. Do not point the BB gun at anything that's alive. Always shoot in front. Make sure everyone else is behind you. Dad really did his best to try to protect us. And so it's my turn. And so I cock the gun and I hold it up and I shoot. And from behind me, my dad swears, and I looked at him and he picked a BB gun out of his shin. It had bounced, it had hit the Smurf, bounced through the back, come all the way back and embedded. So I shot my dad, but not on purpose shot my dad, because I've never even thrown a punch. Like I wouldn't, but it was one of those hilarious moments. So I would say I grew up at an age where there were a lot of toys that would not be considered okay now. Lawn darts and
the BB gun with shooting that's a really interesting metaphor. How sometimes you can take all of the precautions and you can listen to all the rules and you can be paying such good attention to what's happening, and it can still literally backfire.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so having that awareness around how, like, yeah, and sometimes that backfiring is information where it tells us that, oh, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do, and sometimes it's just like dumb, weird, bad luck where you hit the Smurf and it ricocheted in a way that popped your dad in the leg. That's hilarious, by the way. And I can't wait to talk to Bill about it next time I see him. I'm going to just whip it out at like the dinner, like be like, oh yeah, remember that time Mona shot you?
And he'll just be like, I still can't believe that happened. 40 years ago, still can't believe that happened. And then my mom will say something like, but if it was going to happen, it would happen with Mona. She would make some proclamation that would just be where everybody's like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Yeah.
All right. My next question, second to last question, is what are you learning, or what have you learned? It could be either. So it could be present tense or just complete tense from the food that you eat.
I was expecting this question.
I know. You wrote this question.
I feel very involved right now. It's very good. So I was thinking about it, and I feel like I'm always learning from the food I eat. As somebody who's had, and at some point, some real challenges with digestion and with being able to digest different foods, and then being able to, thanks to Ayurveda, reintroduce some foods, and then despite Ayurveda also having to let go of some foods. I feel like food is helping me not to hang on so tight, to recognize that there are going to be things that we hold on to and things that we let go of, but the letting go of can be as simple as, this food doesn't work for me anymore. I need to stop eating it. Or this food only works for me if I eat it at lunch. I'm not having it for dinner anymore. Or, oh my gosh, this food works all the time. I could eat it all the time. Should I eat it all the time? So I feel like some of those almost bigger philosophical lessons are coming through and being shared via the food, which is kind of cool and super brilliant. Because you have to eat, the human organism is designed that they have to eat every day. So there's an opportunity to learn from your food every day. And it strikes me also that everything can be our teacher. Yeah, so I think food, nature is our teacher. And in the case of food, where we're actually consuming the nature, regardless, we're taking in nature, I think there's a lot to learn there. But I'd say for now, my big thing I'm really contemplating a lot is what I let go of and what I hang on to. And also back to stool, but not the kind with 3 legs. When you eat and then you eliminate, if you're able to eliminate, how you eliminate, what you eliminate, that's also your food teaching you. And so I have found that food is just teaching me all the time in all sorts of ways. But mostly right now I'm thinking a lot about what I hang on to, what I let go of. And sometimes those are my ideas around like what is a healthy, I think of what I learned to be healthy food growing up, and then my current perspective on what healthy food looks and feels like and how it's different than what I grew up with. I think of all the messaging out there around what healthy eating looks like and how there are so many opinions about that and how confusing it can be. And so, again, finding a way to keep it really simple has proven for me to be really useful.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wished we had touched upon? Any last things that you would like to say? Something that you didn't get to say that you wished you had?
Yeah, I wish when we first started, I had said, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm thrilled that we get to connect. I'm always thrilled that we get to connect, and to thank everyone who's listening for listening. It's such a joy and a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk about Ayurveda and yoga and philosophy and food and life. And it's such a joy and a privilege. And thank you for having me. I always really appreciate you.
Oh, Mona G, I appreciate you so much in so many different ways. And I am absolutely thrilled that you were able to be on the podcast. I think it will be the first of many. Well, I think this is a good place to call it, but I just want to reiterate my gratitude, not just for you, the listeners, but for you, Mona, for sharing your wisdom with all of us and continuing to do the good work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Veronica G. Love you.
Thank you, Mona G. I love you so much. So that was today's episode, friends. And if you enjoyed learning from and listening to Mona as much as I do, and you want to learn more, go ahead and click on the links below. There's a link to her website, a link to her programming, and definitely get her book. I think it's one of the most important books you can have. It really gives you a good understanding of Ayurveda. In case no one's told you yet today, friends, I love you, and I'm convinced of your capacity to continue crafting a life worth living. Thanks for being here. Remember to hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.